So Jennifer, do you have any thoughts about what times work better for folks? Just in your
Yeah,
experience?
so Stephanie and I were just talking before we started the webinar about, ideal times. I don't think that word ideal, we could apply that to anything in our lives as parents and educators, but, with the time of day or evening that works best for these types of webinars. I've had, requests for both. Sometimes people say during the day, my kids are at school, so a little bit more time, but I also work. So we try to lunch, kind of a lunch and learn type. And then evenings feels like some people, it doesn't conflict with work, but it certainly conflicts with a lot of family obligations. So
Absolutely.
I think,
So
yeah,
yeah,
everyone's
so
different.
participants as you're coming into the room, if you have thoughts, excuse me, if you have thoughts about what works better, like what time of day is a better time for you to attend webinars and trainings like this, that'd be great. We'd also love to hear your name and where you're from if you want to share that with us. And I think we'd also be curious to know who attended the session last week. So this is the fourth in a session series that we're offering, and just curious to see if folks attended last week. You can use the Q&A questions.
The Anne Marie. Hi, Anne Marie. Thank you for
Testing out your
behind the
setup.
scenes work with getting these webinars off the ground. And we're very excited. Typically evenings.
I see
Great.
Jessica saying evenings work better for me, but I just happen to be off today. Well, that's nice. Good for you. That's great. Glad you could join us. So I think I'll go ahead and get us started so we can have as much time as possible for the content today. I'm pleased to welcome everyone here today, and I'm expecting we might have some additional folks join us as we go. My name is Stephanie Moss, and I'm with Parent to Parent of Georgia. I am we are excited at Parent to Parent of Georgia to partner with the International Dyslexia Association Georgia chapter, IDA Georgia. I have to slow down and say that every time. Parent to Parent of Georgia is Georgia's parent training information center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education and providing services to families, children, and youth birth to 26 years of age throughout the state to help them navigate the education system and help them be better able to participate in their children's education. And then IDA Georgia is committed to increasing public awareness about dyslexia and promoting effective teaching practices and intervention strategies. They, much like Parent to Parent of Georgia, offer a lot of information and referral, do a lot of outreach, webinars, newsletters. They also offer an annual conference and have a lot of resources on their website, as we do at Parent to Parent Georgia. So we decided earlier this year that it was really important to partner together to offer this series of webinars around dyslexia for families across the state. So again, we thank you for joining us. Thank you, Katie, for commenting that you like the variety of times and you were able to attend last week, but lunch is better for you. Great. Thanks for sharing that with us. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Lindstrom so we can have as much time for her content as possible.
All
Jennifer?
right. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Anne Marie from IDA Georgia, and for the opportunity to speak with all of you. So I was asked to address in part two of this four-part series, unpacking or understanding the recently passed, let's see, I'm going to share my screen here real quick, literacy and dyslexia legislation. There we go. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. And for those of you who did attend last week's webinar with Ashley and Missy Purcell, Ashley Evans and Missy Purcell, they addressed or went over, gave you a tour of the current version of the Dyslexia Informational Handbook that we released in July of 2025. So I thought it might be most helpful for today's session to really talk about the components of the law that are required as it relates to screening and support plans or intervention for students with different types of designations, if you will, and I'll talk about what those designations are. So that is the goal for me today. And just real briefly, a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Jennifer Lindstrom, and I'm, as we all do, wearing multiple hats, but I serve as the Statewide Dyslexia Coordinator for the Georgia Department of Education and also on the faculty at University of Georgia and co-direct the dyslexia endorsement program and teach courses in the Department of Communication Sciences and Special Ed, and preparing teachers to teach kids how to read. So let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking about how to better understand the process of reading and dyslexia screening and intervention plans. That really seems to be kind of at the heart or the meat of the questions that my partner in crime, Amy Denty, the Director of Literacy for the Georgia Department of Education, those are mostly the types of questions we get, especially from parents. So keep this in mind as you're thinking about your own child or the supports and ways that they're getting reading intervention and instruction in their classroom. And this applies to not just K-3. I know that you learned last week that the House Bill 307, which is the Georgia Early Literacy and Dyslexia Act that was passed in spring of 2025, it really is, and I'm going to pause here before I get into the process. So that bill is really a merging, if you will, of the previously passed dyslexia law, SB 48, and the Literacy Act, HB 537. So those are no longer. It's actually going to be voted on next week at the state board meeting to repeal those two pieces of legislation, because HB 307, I'm going to try not to use numbers all the time, the Georgia Early Literacy and Dyslexia Act replaces both of those. And what Amy Denty and I found last year in the first year of implementation of the Early Literacy Act and the Dyslexia Law was that there were a lot of pieces of both of those laws that there was a lot of overlap, but then there was also some conflicting either rules or requirements or information. And we were hearing loudly and clearly from the field that this is a challenge or this is confusing. So she and I, together with a team of other experts, contributed to writing HB 307 to kind of merge those two laws and make it more streamlined and aligned. So one key thing is that was different from last year is that there are no longer two separate screeners. There used to be in 24-25 school year, you would have a universal reading and dyslexia screener, and then there would also be a separate universal reading screener, and then there would also be a separate dyslexia screener. So that is no longer. When you refer to the laws, there's just one law, and it's the Literacy and Dyslexia Act. And that is in effect as of this July of 2025. I mean, it was passed in spring, but in terms of the requirements. So coming back to the process, what does this look like for students in kindergarten through grade 3, but also beyond? A lot of this is applicable, and I'm happy to say, or relieved or encouraged, maybe is the best word, that we're hearing from a lot of LEAs that they're applying this process for students in grades 4 and 5 and even beyond. For those students who didn't go through this process in grades K through 3. But universal screening in Tier 1 high quality instruction, it's ongoing, it's provided to all students. There are HQIMs, if you've heard of that term or that acronym, high quality instructional materials that are vetted by the Department of Education. A committee does that, and all districts have to identify or adopt an approved HQIM that they use in Tier 1. So that's for all students, and it's happening, all the time. If you are receiving support in a higher level like Tier 2 support or Tier 3 support, you're still getting that high quality Tier 1 instruction. Something else we really work with districts on and try to send this message is that if more than 20% of students in any grade level are at risk, so they're flagged or identified as at risk of not attaining grade level reading proficiency, it's important to evaluate what support may be needed to improve the Tier 1 instruction. So what else is happening at Tier 1? What is happening at Tier 1 that's resulting in a significantly high percentage of students not, being flagged, essentially? That shouldn't be the case. So that's a kind of a red flag, if you will, that something needs to be reconsidered or reevaluated at Tier 1. Another important point throughout this process is that teachers are an integral part of the screening process. So if you go to your child's teacher after you've received some sort of results from a screener or notification that your child is receiving tier 2 support, your child's teacher should be very well aware of where your child is performing on the screeners, on progress monitoring. These decisions should not be made outside, from a team that is that doesn't include the teacher. So they need to be really at the table, making these decisions, making the plans. And then all the time for everything we're doing in education with intervention, instruction, and screening, it must be implemented with fidelity. And that just means it's implemented in the way it was intended. So the dosage, the frequency, the time, you're sticking to if there's any sort of script or if there's steps you need to follow for that program or curriculum, you're following it. So that's really important. Okay, so this is in the dyslexia handbook that you saw last week, or that Missy provided an overview of. But I'm going to go through each of these steps, and I'll pause throughout as I'm explaining the steps and what this means for students in kindergarten and through grade 3 and beyond. Well, I say beyond, that's not required, but in students in kindergarten through grade 3, and see if there's questions. And green represents tier 1, orange represents tier 2, the berry colored represents tier 3, and then the blue represents for those students who may be referred for special education. So just kind of big picture if you want to keep that in mind. One key point about the process is that the screening process is iterative and fluid, meaning you go through certain steps, but you repeat that multiple times a year. And a student, if they are identified as needing support at tier level or tier 2 level, they're not there forever. You would either adjust and they're responding to instruction, so they may move back into tier 1, or they're not showing a response you would expect. So you don't want a student just kind of stalling out in a particular level. And I know that that's sometimes what we hear from parents, that seems to be happening. Another key point, the star on the bottom left, LEAs, so those are local education agencies, must administer this universal reading and screener. There's an approved list of 5. They have to pick one. And the approved screeners, as I already mentioned, meet the requirements as both a reading and dyslexia screener. The definition of foundational reading skills, and I'm over on the right now, includes phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, alphabet knowledge, phonics, oral reading fluency, spelling, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and RAN. So those are the skills you're going to see that are assessed on the screener, but also in the characteristics of dyslexia rubric that you talked a little bit about last week with Missy and Ashley, but I'll talk more about today. So let's start with the green into the orange, the top part of the flow chart. So we're going to be talking about screening requirements, parent notification. I already mentioned a little bit about high quality instruction, and then what the tiered reading support plan should look like and when that happens. So the first step in this process, again, we repeat it, so it's not completely linear. That's why we have this circular or wagon wheel type of image. So you have to conduct universal reading and dyslexia screening 3 times a year, so beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year, and then analyze the results each time. And you look at those results along with other data to determine who might be at risk of not attaining grade level reading proficiency. Some of the decisions that need to be made in advance and that you could be asking as a parent, like who conducts the screener? Who's involved in the data analysis? It should be classroom teachers, assessment teams, interventionists. You need to decide, the literacy team needs to decide when to screen. And it must be completed within the first 30 school days of the first day of school. And then the school or the team should establish a timeline for data analysis. So after you administer each screening, again, 3 times a year, as a reminder, there's not a separate dyslexia screener that's required. Then the team needs to meet and triangulate all data using all available information. And then after each of the screenings, there's a determination that needs to be made of whether a student is significantly at risk of not attaining grade level reading proficiency. And a change to the law now compared to previous law is that this decision is made based on the screener results and other data that's available on the student. So in the past, it was just essentially per the law, just the screener result, and that wasn't best practice. So once I get through the green, I'm going to pause and answer questions that may have come up. So the next part is parent notification. And again, I know this was briefly mentioned last week, but regardless of the results, all students in K-3, the parents must be notified of the results, regardless of whether there's concern. And if the team has determined that a student is significantly at risk of not attaining grade level reading proficiency, that the parents must be notified in writing no later than 15 school days after that determination. The parents must be informed in writing and then also be provided with strategies. And we have provided templates for the letter that can go home. Districts can use their own or modify the template that we have created, but the information that needs to be included in the letter doesn't change. So you need to know what the support the student is currently receiving, what's going to change if there is a change, and the report from the screener should be included, the results of the screener. As I already mentioned, I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this slide. There's going to be high quality instruction that is provided to every student in K-3, regardless of any determination or identified weaknesses in reading. And it's important to keep in mind that structured literacy approach is recommended for all students, and it's characterized by explicit, systematic, cumulative diagnostic instruction in phonology, sound symbol association, syllable instruction, morphology, syntax, and semantics. And teachers have been, there is a requirement for the Literacy and Dyslexia Act that teachers have training in the science of reading. So this should not be something that is new to them or foreign. So at the end of that green into the orange part of the flow chart, if the team has determined the student is significantly at risk of not attaining grade level reading proficiency, they would get a tiered reading support plan. And the plan must be implemented no later than 30 school days after the student was identified. And it must describe the evidence-based reading interventions. So this includes the specific skills being targeted, the frequency and duration, structure, group size, who provides the intervention, the level of tiered support, and then description of how progress will be monitored. And again, we have created templates for the tiered reading support plan. LEAs are welcome to use those or adapt accordingly based on their own kind of system or process. But this information must be on that plan, and parents should have a copy of this. So I'm going to pause here and take any questions.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
The first question is, what's the best link to find the list of HQIM?
I'm going to share a resource at the end where you can find all of the relevant resources related to the Georgia Early Literacy and Dyslexia Act. So stay tuned, it's our last slide, and there's a QR code and a hyperlink that will bring you to that.
Great, thank you. And then other question is, can a school implement any appropriate instruction if there are no teachers or administrators in the school who have any training or PD in dyslexia identification or remediation?
I think, okay, so the beginning of the question is, can they implement
any appropriate instruction if there's no teacher or administrator with the training or PD?
So all teachers are required to have training. So that's part of the Georgia Early Literacy and Dyslexia Act. So there shouldn't be teachers who are not trained. The level of training can vary. There's 4 different ways they can meet the professional learning requirements, but if I had a student or my child, I haven't gotten to this yet, but if you're further along in the process and have it identified as characteristics of dyslexia, I would expect the teacher working with my child to have multiple levels of training, and not the minimum requirement on the science of reading. But that's
Okay.
not in the law. That's not required, though. There is a minimum requirement in the law, but the advanced training is not required.
And a couple more comments kind of related to that same question. The Dyslexia Act requires only early elementary teachers to have training in structured literacy. Is there anything in the legislation for older students? And is
Not in
anyone
the
tracking?
legislation,
Okay.
but there is a lot of LEAs who are saying all K-5, all K-8 teachers, and there's a lot of professional development training that we have offered through the Department of Education for adolescent literacy. And most districts, if not all, in some ways, are having their teachers engage in those and complete those modules.
And then
But
there
it's
was
not
just,
required.
oh, sorry, excuse me. Thank you. And then is anyone tracking if the training has been completed? How's that tracked?
Yes, there is quite a long list of reporting requirements, and that's included in that. And that has to be done by each school and then at the district level. So we receive all that data.
Great. I think that's it for right now.
Okay. So just as a reminder, I've briefly explained the process for the green into the orange. And now we're going to talk about supporting students with characteristics of dyslexia. And also keep in mind, the green is all students. Orange is at most 20% ballpark. We would expect no more than 20% of those students in the orange. And then as we're getting further down in the flow chart, there's going to be significantly fewer students for whom this would apply. So now we're going to be talking about after they've had a tiered reading support plan and receiving level 2 support or tier 2 intervention, but they're still showing inadequate response, what that might look like and how that should be supported, that student should be supported, and how to complete the characteristics of dyslexia rubric, and then a support plan and parent notification requirements. So keep in mind too that showing inadequate response, then we will move to from tier 2 level support to tier 3. And those differences lie in the intensity, duration, group size, and customization of the intervention. So there's not a separate set of interventions that should be used for these students who are showing inadequate response after tier 2 intervention. What you should see differences in are if it's a pull out of, or even within the general ed classroom of 7 to 10 students, now we should expect to see maybe groups of 1 to 3. The type of intervention is more targeted. The frequency, it might go from 3 days a week to 5 days a week. The duration might go from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. It may be a different teacher, EIP teacher, who has in more advanced training working with those students. So those are the differences you should expect to see. So the team is going to continue using progress monitoring data to determine the effectiveness of the intensified interventions and then make adjustments as needed. Additional data may include work sample analysis, diagnostic assessments, other classroom data. And the team should examine all available data. And if SST has not already been initiated, that might happen. And also keep in mind, if SST is student support team, it does not always lead to referral for special education. It may, but it's not an automatic. Also, when we're getting to this berry into the blue section of the flow chart, the decision making is very individualized. It's done on a case-by-case basis. It might happen, the decisions at different times for different students. So it's not as standardized, should I say. So if you get to the point and the team has collected additional data, they want to begin filling out or completing the characteristics of dyslexia rubric. This will likely require additional diagnostic assessments. You should not be able to complete this rubric using screening data alone. If additional diagnostic assessments are needed, then parent consent is required. And so as you're collecting this additional, more, very targeted type of skill performance data for in students on an individual case by case basis, you're completing that rubric. And at the end, the team, once the rubric is completed and they've determined we're ready to make a decision after we analyze the data, review it, look at progress monitoring, and the decision, they'll either decide, yes, it looks like the student has characteristics of dyslexia, and then we'll create a support plan. We'll notify the parents. And again, parents should be very engaged or involved in the process. This is not the first time they're hearing from the team or the teacher or the school about concerns or how their child is performing. Or the team may decide, no, we don't believe it's characteristics of dyslexia, but we believe there's probably other factors that are causing weaknesses in these foundational reading skills. And there's probably other areas too that the student is demonstrating weakness in. And here's our plan. It's not a characteristics of dyslexia plan, but it is a tier 3 plan that we're going to continue supporting the student. And then at that point, again, if the answer is yes, the team would no longer the student would no longer have a tiered reading support plan. They would then have a characteristics of dyslexia support plan. And those differences in the plans, again, you should expect to see the group size decreasing, frequency duration increasing, potentially a different teacher working with your child. And in terms of parent notification requirements by law, the parents must be notified in writing no later than 15 school days after the identification that their child has been identified as having characteristics of dyslexia. And ideally, you're at that meeting where you're reviewing the rubric together and that determination has been made. So parents should be a very integral part of that decision-making process. And then you'll want a copy of that characteristics of dyslexia support plan to make sure, and just to review what is being addressed and how it's different than the tiered reading support plan. So I just flew through all that, and I know there's lots of questions, which I'm going to pause here and then I'll talk through some of these resources. But here's where you can find, for the person who asked, the list of approved HQIM programs. You can find it on this if you scan this QR code. And then if you look at, there's a little, you see about halfway down, it says high quality instructional materials. That's a drop down, and you click on that and you'll see the report of approved programs.
Sorry, I had to unmute. We do have a couple more questions.
Okay.
The first question is, screening is required for K through 3. What about students above grade 3 who need support?
Yeah, so if it were me, so there's a couple different scenarios that might be happening for students who are in grade 4 and above. One scenario, depending on your school, is that they're also using this process. It's not uncommon. We hear a lot that we're just doing this for all K-5. So yay, if that's happening. Let's say that's not happening. And you have concerns. So by 4th grade, there is a lot of available data on your student. Whether or not they were formally screened for dyslexia, there's other data that it might not be a universal reading dyslexia screener, but there is quite a bit of data specific to reading skills. And what I would do is ask, pull out the rubric and say, can you show me where my child is performing in each of these areas? In any area they can't complete the cell, the row column, for in that particular skill area, I would ask for additional diagnostic assessments to be administered, or like, how can we get a measure? How can we get a score performance indicator for that area? So that's the next step I would do. Some screeners do go up through K-8. So if they have it, that would be the first stop, is just, can you screen my child? Is there a screener that you have access to that goes up to grade 6 or 7? whatever grade your child is in. If not, there are other available diagnostic assessments that they can certainly administer. The other scenario, so that's, I think I went through 2 or 3 already, would be if it's a significant concern, they have enough data, again, on your student, your child, you can request a special education evaluation. And if you haven't done that yet, then that's what I would do.
Okay. And that same person just dropped in a note, I'd say in secondary schools. So I'm not sure if she's thinking beyond
So
her
same, this answer applies to all
Okay, okay.
K-12. So,
Okay,
so grades 4 through 12, that's same,
Perfect.
the answer would be the same.
Great, thank you. And then the other question we've got waiting is, how does the process differ for kids who already have an IEP? Do they still
Good.
have to go through the
Glad you said
tiers
that.
for reading support specifically?
Yeah, so here is a great resource. We think it's great. We hope you do. And this is explained a little bit in terms of like if I have an outside diagnosis of dyslexia, or what's the difference between dyslexia and specific learning disability. So you can go ahead and pull up this document as I'm talking if you want. So this is a really common question. My child has an IEP. It could be for OHI, it could be for ASD, it could be for something not with a specific learning disability. Or it could be for specific learning disability and reading. And I want my child screened for dyslexia. So regardless of the classification, your child, and regardless of what grade, I would first look at the IEP, and if there are reading goals, then there's not really much more. You've already gone way above and beyond the process I just explained. So they have more comprehensive evaluation and data than you're going to get from a screener. If the IEP does not include reading goals, that wasn't really on their radar in terms of weaknesses in reading, I would see again what diagnostic. I'd pull out the rubric and say, where is my child performing in all of these foundational literacy skill areas? And if they say we don't know, then I would say, let's find out. Let's administer. They already have an IEP, so you have the right to request an additional, evaluation of these areas, and then they can complete that. And if it shows that there are weaknesses in reading that haven't been addressed in the IEP, then they would amend the IEP.
We don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay, great. So this is who you can reach out to, myself and Amy Denty, with questions. But I do want to come back to this and just highlight some of these great resources. And they're not all specifically for parents, but there are a lot here that can help you if you are looking for answers before you're reaching out to the school or before a meeting that you want to know more. This flow chart is here. Like I said, the HQIM, if you go to over on the left here where it says dyslexia resources, some of them are here, but then there's also additional ones. You'll go to the handbook. That's where you can find that. Let's see, like the characteristics of dyslexia, the support plan template and the tiered reading support plan template, that's here. You can download that. It's a Word version, just so you know that you can say, here's what should be in the tiered reading support plan. And the one you gave me, it looks like there might be some things missing. Let's talk, let's collaborate, as Missy said last week. Let's see how we can reconcile this. So this is a great, kind of repository for you to be aware of. And that parent resource guide that I just showed you here can also be found in the repository.
And we got a couple more questions.
Okay, great. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Is a vision and hearing screening required before the screener process begins?
It is not, just if a student is referred for special education evaluation.
The next two questions are specific to middle schoolers. The first is, are there specific recommendations for HQIM?
That is a good question. I don't recall off the top of my head if in the adolescent. So if you go back to, let me share my screen again. So if you go to the, You see over here on the left, it says adolescent literacy resources 4 through 12. There's quite a lot of resources there. I haven't dug into them. I can't answer that question off the top of my head, but that's where I would look to see. The other thing, it's not required again for grades 4 through 12 to go through the approval process of which ones, but some of the resources here may address which programs.
Okay, great. And that second question, kind of the follow-up to that, was related to interventions for dyslexia for middle schoolers. I would assume that's the same place we want to dig around, right?
Yeah, but again, that, from talking about the requirements of the law, it's not in the law, but we are, there's quite a bit that we have developed and are providing in terms of support for teachers and training for adolescent literacy.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Let me see. Let me make sure I'm looking at both places. Okay, sorry, back to the IEP question. So they can amend the IEP without going through the whole tier process. I guess that's it. Is that a yes or no? Or can they?
I'd really have to talk with you about, I don't know if are there reading goals in the IEP?
Great question.
So I guess that's the first place we need to start.
Okay.
Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I don't see an answer to that coming in.
Okay, so that's my first question. Are there reading goals? The IEP essentially will serve as the either tiered reading support plan or characteristics of dyslexia support plan if there are reading goals.
Mhm.
And we have a great webinar. You can see here, it's understanding it's the IDEA and Georgia's literacy and dyslexia legislation. So that's specific to students who already have an IEP. We're in the process of revising it. So this is last year's, and in the next probably 2 weeks, we'll have a new one out. A lot of the content though won't change in terms of process. So it really just depends. You either have an IEP without reading goals, and then you determine there's weaknesses in foundational reading. So the team may decide, well, let's have a tiered reading support plan to collect more information, or we have enough information, let's amend the IEP.
And a follow-up related question was, and I think we've kind of started to cover this, but what about required student support for a child in middle or high school with an IEP and a dyslexia diagnosis?
Yeah, so again, you just need to look at the IEP to make sure that the goals and objectives and the present level performance is accurate. It reflects those weaknesses.
Mhm. Right. Just a second more. Okay. So, yeah, actually, I think Jennifer, as you wrap up, there was a question. Let's see. Oh, there's a parent says, what are some good questions parents can ask our schools about the new screeners they're using?
Well, they should have one. And they've all been approved and vetted by the Literacy Screening Advisory Group, overseen by Lindy Morgan, myself, and Amy Denty. And that was a fairly involved process last year. So you can read that report. It is also found in this screening and support plans, or you can look on the Deal Center website. They have the report. But in terms of what you can ask about the screener, they have to use an approved screener, and they need to administer it 3 times a year. And that's probably it. I don't know if there are other specific questions you want. You can, you need to ask about it.
And I think the last question might be how you wrap up. If anyone has more specific questions about their situation, their school, professional development, that sort of stuff, can they reach out to you?
Oh, definitely. Yep. That's our contact information is on that last slide. So don't hesitate to reach out.
So as you guys know, this session was recorded. The recording for this webinar, the one last week, and we have 2 more upcoming in October, early October. They'll all be recorded. They'll all be available on Parent to Parents website, as well as IDEA Georgia's website and IDEA's YouTube channel. I think I got that right. And I guess the slides will be posted as well. So potentially, right? So we'll make sure
that is a question for Anne Marie.
Anne Marie says yes.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect. So if there are no more questions, I think on behalf of Parent to Parent Georgia, Georgia Department of Education, and IDA Georgia, we want to thank you for joining us today. And we hope that you will visit IDA Georgia's website to register for the next 2 sessions that we have in this series, because we're real excited about the content and the presenters and continuing this discussion.
Yes, and there's also the International Dyslexia Association's National Conference in Atlanta this year in October. So you can check out the IDA Georgia website to register for that as well if you're interested.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.